Hi, welcome to SynthArc. My name is Paul, and I'm just here as a demonstrator to show off the SynthArc MSP AJx Programmer. SynthArc is on a mission of creating programmers like these for specifically vintage synthesizers that have flat panels, meaning they don't have dials, they don't have sliders, they don't have switches or other types of live controls. They're usually based on button controls and menu diving, so much like the Alpha Juno series here, or synthesizers like the Ensoniq ESQ1, the Kawai K3, and other synthesizers that really could use a little more live control to spice them up. So this particular programmer is set up for the Roland Alpha Juno series. So if you have a Roland Alpha Juno 1, a Roland Alpha Juno 2, if you have a Roland HS10 like I have here, this is the Synth Plus 10, the Roland MKS50, which is the rack mount version, or a Roland HS80, you can use this programmer. I think the thing that I love the most about having a programmer like this for a flat panel synthesizer like the Roland HS10 is that it's almost like having a brand new synthesizer right in front of you. I've had this synth since 1997 when I bought it from a pawn shop, used for about $180. That's when vintage synths were pretty cheap and you could pick them up pretty easily. And I've had it for years. I've programmed sounds on it, and I've gotten a lot out of it. I've only had this programmer for a short time. That's exactly how it feels, is that it is like tapping into a brand new synthesizer. You just pull sounds out of it that you don't expect. Even simple sounds. I just was really surprised by that. And when I started programming this synthesizer years ago, I found that it was a tedious process. It was still rewarding, and I still enjoyed it, but I found that my programming was much more goal-oriented. So I would go in saying like, okay, I want to create a bass sound, or I want to create a flute sound. There wasn't a whole lot of room to just go off on tangents, but with a programmer, it's like you can just change things so quickly. That's something I wanted to point out too, is that I can grab more than one control at one time. I can take the envelope controls here and just go and just slide them all up at once and create something new and different. Let's take a look at the layout of this programmer. Over on the left-hand side here, we have the oscillator section. I can choose the sawtooth wave or the square wave, or mix both together. I can move over to one of the alternate waveforms and a variation of that. Now what I can do is I can change the pulse width by switching both switches on the bottom here. And then adding pulse width modulation. And one of the cool things that's amazing about the Roland Alpha Juno 1 is that it has not only pulse width modulation, but saw width modulation, and I can engage that by flipping these two switches here. Change the saw width. Moving over here, we have the sub oscillator. And there's a couple different options for the sub oscillator waveforms. And then I can add my other waveforms in. I can change the octave of the, lower the octave of the sub. And then finally over here we have noise. And it's great. You can easily just sort of mix these levels together. And moving over here, we have the octave switch. This is our coarse tuning. And moving on, we now have our LFO section. I can easily add some vibrato to the oscillator. Here's the rate control. One thing I want to point out about the LFO is that this little oscillator modulation control, you can actually use this as more of a live control. And it might actually be more preferable than using the alpha dial or using the joystick control. To create vibrato. And of course you can use the filter control as well. Or both at the same time. Moving over here, we have the glide control, portamento. Switch it on right here, and then the rate control right here. Over here we have, this says press. This is actually aftertouch controls. So if you have a keyboard controller that is controlling aftertouch, you can control the amount of oscillator modulation, filter modulation, and of course, amplitude modulation. And of course, this is everybody's favorite section of a synthesizer. The filter cutoff, and here's your resonance. And one thing that you may be hearing is stair-stepping. And I should point out that that's not coming from the programmer, it's actually coming from the Alpha Juno synthesizer itself. And that's because when it was created in the mid-80s, there wasn't a lot of resolution for the filter cutoff. But fortunately, I think filter cutoff is probably the only control that you will notice that kind of stair-stepping and obvious digital control with it. In some ways, though, it's kind of a fun little effect. Makes the synth very unique. And with smooth motion, you can kind of get around it. And now we move over here to this section. We have the envelope controls. The first thing you'll see here is the amount that we can modulate the filter with, or the oscillator with the envelope. So let's get an envelope going here. And this is great. I can just grab these sliders and move them all at once. Shape my sound however I like it. Change the modulation amount. Maybe add some oscillator modulation. That's fun. I can change the polarity of it so that I can reverse the envelope. It's go back to positive. And then I can change the envelope so it's a gated envelope. And over here is your keyboard tracking for the envelope. You can hear all the higher notes are now brighter. And then finally, the last control here is probably one of the cool parts of the Alpha Juno series, your chorus effect. Switch it on, switch it off, switch back on, change the amount. And there's just one more control I wanted to point out on the programmer here, and that is a little switch in the bottom that is marked hold. If I switch it on, it will hold the notes. Now this is really clever because all this is the equivalent of the sustain pedal input for the synthesizer. But instead of a sustain pedal, we now have a toggle switch. And so if you're really into drones, this is probably the control that you might love. And I wanted to just reiterate the idea that when you get a programmer like this, it is like getting a brand new synthesizer. That's what I found, is that even though I've had this synth for years, I'm able to pull sounds out of it that I never thought I could. It shows the potential of the synthesizer, and it's so much more creative that way. I can change things so quickly with it that I can wander around with it and make my programming much more intuitive. So if you're interested in a programmer like the MSP AJx for the Roland Alpha Juno series, or programmers for other synthesizers, other flat panel synthesizers like this from the 80s and the 90s that you probably want to put a little more creative juice into, check out synthark.com. And you can see some of the options that they have available. There's a lot of projects that they have in the works, and it may take some time to develop them. It's kind of a labor of love for Synthark, so check it out, see what they have available, see what possibilities are there, and actually just share with them maybe the things that you're looking for, the programmers that you would like to see.